Episode 3, Beneath the Veil of Secrecy. 1. Into the heart of the island. Morning arrived, washing away some of the night's unease, though the fog lingered in patches. After a quick breakfast, the group set off in 2 teams once again. The goal? Follow the fence line deeper into the island to see if it led to any active installation. Miles led Jamie and Dan along one side of the fence. Meredith and Carlos took the other side, equipped with sample bags for collecting strange flora. The path was not easy. Thorny vines stretched across the fence, and dense ferns clogged the undergrowth. The air was humid, making sweat bead on their foreheads. Occasionally, they glimpsed evidence of roads or footpaths, flattened vegetation, rusted remains of signage, but all had been reclaimed by the island's relentless flora. Midway through the trek, Jamie discovered a small clearing scattered with tall, spindly plants bearing strange violet-blue flowers. They stood in clusters, their stems a mottled green and red color. The petals had intricate, fractal-like patterns. Jamie, calling out, "Hey, Doctor! Pendleton! I think I found something you'll want to see." Miles and Dan hurried over. Miles crouched beside the plant, eyes shining with excitement. "Miles, could this be it?" the plant Gaspard mentioned. "I've never seen a species like this. The coloration alone is extraordinary." Dan, "We should definitely take samples. Let's get pictures too." Jamie carefully snipped off a sample, placing it in a zippered plastic bag with a moist paper towel to keep it fresh. She also collected a small portion of the soil in which it grew. As they worked, an unsettling thought crossed Miles's mind. If this is indeed the plant with powerful psychoactive properties, it might explain the presence of LSD canisters. Perhaps the military was testing or refining its potency. 2. The concrete complex. Meredith and Carlos, meanwhile, stumbled upon what appeared to be the main complex of the old facility, a cluster of concrete buildings, many with collapsed roofs or shattered windows. A large sign lay face down in the dirt, broken into pieces. Carlos flipped a chunk of it over with his boot, revealing partial lettering. Urch Facey. Possibly it once read Research Facility. Gaining entry into one of the smaller structures required prying open a rusted steel door. Inside, they found a corridor littered with debris, broken glass, torn cables, and decaying furniture. The stench of mold and rust filled the air. In one room, they discovered battered steel desks and filing cabinets whose drawers had been either removed or left hanging open. Most were empty, but in the corner, underneath a fallen partition, lay a tattered box of old documents. Meredith, cautiously lifting the box. "Look, these might still be legible." They carried the box into a patch of sunlight streaming through the collapsed roof and began to sift through the papers. Faded memos bore official headings like U.S. Navy Special Projects Division. One partially legible document referenced a plant compound number 17 with a note, "High psychoactive potential significantly exceeds LSD 25 in potency." Another memo detailed safety protocols for handling live plant specimens, advising heavy sedation and protective gear. Carlos felt his pulse quicken. This was the proof. The U.S. Navy had not just stumbled upon the island, they had actively researched a psychoactive plant that dwarfed LSD in potency. He rifled through more pages. "Carlos, this is insane. They knew about a plant that can alter perception to a degree never before recorded. Why hasn't this leaked to the public?" Meredith shared his sense of awe and dread. If these documents were real, the U.S. government had likely suppressed their existence for fear of the plant's potential misuse or weaponization. 3. A secret still active. As they continued exploring the abandoned corridors, Meredith noticed something peculiar. Fresh footprints in the dust. Human boot prints, far too recent to be from the facility's heyday. Someone else had been here, maybe even in the last few days. She motioned for Carlos to be quiet, pressing a finger to her lips. They carefully followed the footprints deeper into the complex, descending a flight of stairs to a lower level. At the bottom, they found a heavy metal door with more modern hardware, newer than the rusted doors above. It had an electronic keypad lock, blinking with a faint red LED. This was a stark contrast to the decades-old debris around them. Carlos crouched down, examining the lock. Carlos, this is definitely not 1950s tech. Looks like a fairly modern security system, maybe installed within the last 10 years. Meredith, so the facility might still be operational in some capacity. Let's not try to force it. We need the others. They retreated, hearts pounding. If a modern security door existed, it meant an active presence, possibly armed. They hurried back toward the surface to rendezvous with Miles and the rest. On the way, they clutched the box of documents tightly, as it was now invaluable evidence of a continuing operation. Fourth confrontation in the jungle. Miles, Jamie, and Dan, meanwhile, had continued along the fence line after collecting the plant samples. Suddenly, Dan halted, placing a hand on Miles's shoulder. Dan, whispering, "Did you hear that?" They listened. Footsteps in the brush, heavy, purposeful. Jamie tensed, scanning the thick foliage. A moment later, 3 figures emerged from behind a cluster of tropical ferns. They wore dark green fatigues, carried firearms slung over their shoulders, and bore no visible insignias. One stepped forward, a tall man with a grim expression. Soldier, curtly, "Identify yourselves." Miles, raising hands defensively. "We're scientists. We came from a research vessel. We mean no harm." The soldier's gaze flicked to the bag of plant samples Jamie held. He frowned. "Soldier, this island is under restricted control. You're trespassing." Jamie, "We had no idea. There were no notices at sea." Soldier, nodding to his companions, "We need you to come with us." One soldier grabbed Dan's arm, another took Jamie's. Miles started to protest, but the muzzle of a rifle cut him short. They had little choice but to comply. The soldiers led them deeper into the jungle, eventually reaching a dirt road that ended at a barbed wire gate. Beyond it stood a row of low buildings with modern antennas. Clearly a functioning military compound, perhaps the real heart of the island's covert research. 5. Taken to the base. The trio was ushered inside one of the low-slung buildings, down a corridor with fluorescent lighting. Eventually, they arrived in a small interrogation room furnished only with a table and a few chairs. A man in his late 50s, wearing a navy blue uniform devoid of clear rank insignia, greeted them with stern composure. "Officer. Doctor. Pendleton, I presume." Miles tried to hide his surprise. How did this man know his name? "Officer. Don't be alarmed. We've been monitoring your communications since you entered this region. We know who you are, and we know why you're here. You are correct that René Daumal's novel and Dr. Gaspard's notes reference this island. But you need to understand something. Everything that happens here is classified at the highest level." Miles. "Classified? This is a covert US base, isn't it?" Officer. "Yes, and you are trespassing on sovereign territory. By all rights, we should detain you indefinitely for violating national security protocols." Jamie and Dan exchanged worried looks. The officer paced for a moment, then continued. "Officer. However, we also recognize that forcibly disappearing a group of academics could cause complications. Dr. Pendleton, you should have heeded the warnings. This island is not on any map for very specific reasons. We can't just let you walk away with your discoveries." He exhaled, then took a seat across from them. "Officer, there's something else. We're not monsters. We've been studying this place for decades, and in a twisted sense, we appreciate the scientific value of your curiosity. The question is whether you can handle the truth and keep it to yourselves." Sixth revelation of the psychedelic plant. Meanwhile, back at the abandoned facility, Meredith and Carlos waited anxiously for Miles's group to appear. When they didn't, Meredith attempted radio contact. Static. Alarm bells rang in her mind. Perhaps the same people who installed that new keypad lock had also jammed their frequencies. They decided to return to the beach camp to regroup with the others. On the way, however, they encountered the same detachment of armed soldiers. A tense standoff ensued, but ultimately they were also taken into custody and brought to the same modern compound. Soon, the entire team stood together in a larger briefing room under armed guard. The officer introduced himself as Commander Jonathan Pierce. He began a controlled explanation. Commander Pierce. After World War II, U.S. intelligence caught wind of a French scientist, Dr. Émile Gaspard, claiming knowledge of a plant with psychoactive properties exponentially stronger than LSD. When we discovered his references led to this island, we established a top-secret research post in the early 1950s under the Navy's aegis. Over the decades, the project changed hands, eventually moving under the purview of certain black-budget programs. We've been here ever since, studying the plant's chemistry, biology, and its potential applications. Miles, still absorbing the shock, managed to voice the obvious question. Miles, applications for what? Biological weapons? Mind control? Commander Pierce, sighing. A bit of everything, to be candid. In the Cold War era, the US feared the Soviets might discover this place first and harness the plant's properties. We called it Floris tenebris for official documentation. Its active compound is, to put it simply, about 10,000 times more potent than LSD-25 on a per-microgram basis. It's not just about hallucinations. This stuff fundamentally alters perception of time and space. Users often claim to see additional dimensions. Jamie's face went pale. Dan swallowed hard. This was bigger than any of them had anticipated. Commander Pierce. We lost good men and women to experiments gone wrong. The compound is so potent that it can permanently rewire cognitive function. Some describe it as lifting the veil. Once you see certain layers of reality, you can't unsee them. There's no going back to normal perception. 7. The impossible choice. The commander offered them a deal. They could voluntarily remain on the island for a short period under supervision to witness the research firsthand, on the condition that they sign top-secret NDAs. Afterward, they would be taken off the island and strongly discouraged from ever talking about it. Alternatively, they could be detained indefinitely. Their data, recordings, and samples would be confiscated, their story buried by an official narrative. Commander Pierce. Choose wisely. We don't relish forcing you into silence, but national security demands it. Miles glanced at the others. Meredith gave a slight nod, as if to say, we don't have a real choice. Jamie looked terrified, but determined. Carlos and Dan steeled themselves. They each agreed to sign, though none liked the prospect of being muzzled. The forms were produced, short paragraphs of legalese indicating they understood the ramifications. Any disclosure could lead to criminal charges, or worse. Miles. All right, we'll sign. But you have to let us continue our scientific work within reason. Give us the chance to see what's really going on. We've come this far. Commander Pierce concurred. You'll have limited access to certain areas. But I warn you, the more you learn, the more you risk your own peace of mind. 8. A controlled encounter with the plant. To the team's astonishment, they were escorted to a modern laboratory wing. White fluorescent lights, stainless steel counters, advanced equipment reminiscent of a state-of-the-art biotech facility. Researchers in lab coats nodded at them with a mix of curiosity and guarded suspicion. In a sealed, temperature-controlled chamber, they beheld rows of the very plants Jamie had sampled. Here, they were cultivated hydroponically, each assigned a barcode and tracking number. Dr. Eleanor Roth, the facility's lead botanist, explained the basics. Dr. Roth. We've isolated the active alkaloid in Floris tenebris. Its chemical structure bears some resemblance to ergot alkaloids, like LSD, but it has extra complex ring structures we still don't fully understand. We call the compound daumalene, a nod to René Daumal's indirect involvement. Even a dose as small as a nanogram can produce profound effects. Meredith stared, enthralled. How do you keep it contained? Dr. Roth. Strict safety protocols. You'll notice we have triple airlocks and negative pressure systems. Researchers must wear protective suits. Even a stray pollen grain can cause mild psychoactive episodes. Miles's mind reeled. This was beyond what he had imagined, a research operation so advanced it seemed more futuristic than historical. The puzzle pieces began to align. The storms, the magnetic anomalies, the hush-hush nature. This plant was too valuable or too dangerous to expose to the world. 9. The Doors of Perception. Commander Pierce and Dr. Roth led the group to a chamber sealed behind multiple security doors. Inside, it resembled a hospital ICU. Padded walls, monitoring equipment, EEG machines, and IV setups. Roth explained that this was where controlled experiments were conducted on volunteer subjects, usually specially trained military personnel or intelligence operatives. Dr. Roth. During the Cold War, we tested Dormaline's potential for interrogation, espionage, even remote viewing. Results were unpredictable. Some subjects reported accurate visions of distant locations. Others went mad, unable to reconcile the layers of reality they experienced. Dan pressed for details. So, the compound possibly taps into something like quantum consciousness or higher dimensional awareness. Roth shrugged carefully. We can't confirm the mechanism. We only know that once you've ingested Dormaline, your baseline perception never fully returns to normal. The sensory gating in the brain changes permanently. Jamie, recalling her diaries of the journey, realized she was stepping into the heart of what Daumal and Gaspar had foreseen, a means of peering behind the curtain of ordinary existence. 10. An offer of the ultimate experiment. At the close of the lab tour, Commander Pierce confronted them with an unexpected proposal. Commander Pierce, as part of your limited cooperation, we're granting you a chance to experience Dormaline under strict supervision. You came all this way. Maybe you want to see for yourselves. Of course, it's entirely voluntary. But if you agree, be aware you can't go back to who you were before. Meredith and Carlos exchanged alarmed glances. Dan seemed torn, fascinated, yet fearful. Jamie stared at the floor, her mind a whirlwind of speculation. Finally, Miles spoke for them. Miles, what kind of dose are we talking about? Dr. Roth. A sub-threshold dose, enough to produce mild illusions and glimpses of the phenomenon, but theoretically safe from cataclysmic mental breaks. Our standard procedure. But even a mild dose can be world-altering. Silence stretched in the sterile air. Each person weighed the potential breakthroughs against the existential risks. The group retreated to a private side room to discuss. The tension was palpable. Meredith, voice shaking slightly. We have dedicated our lives to the pursuit of knowledge. This is possibly the greatest frontier of all, exploring consciousness. But the cost is enormous. Dan, it might change us forever. Are we ready for that? Jamie, softly. I'm scared. But if we don't do it, we'll always wonder. And maybe the world deserves to know, even if we can't tell it openly. Carlos, if we do this, we have to be sure we support each other. No one left behind. Miles looked around at these people who had trusted him enough to follow him here. He realized their bond had grown stronger than he could have ever imagined. Miles, we came for truth. Let's see it through. And so they made the fateful decision. Unbeknownst to them, this choice would open doors of perception they might never be able to close, catapulting them into realms that defied both modern science and the comfortable illusions of everyday life.